right. Good morning. Good morning. There we go. Now we're talking. Some late parties last night, so I appreciate all you early risers and the folks that were in the breakfast sessions, and extra congratulations as well. That was 7:15 was tough. But it's great to be here. I'm very excited about this session. We're gonna jump right in. A quick backstory. Molly Starr, who's somewhere here, when I used to work, when I was at AdTech, as the chairman of AdTech, she was at Pandora and getting great speakers, and she's running comms now for Innovation Endeavors, and she hit me up and said, have you heard about the Super Revolution? And it was great to have Harpy Singh at our New York CDX event to talk about the Super Revolution, and I was fascinated by it and read a lot about it, and very excited to jump in here. And we have Matt, who's one of the portfolio companies of Innovation Endeavors. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do very brief introductions. Dror, we'll start with you, who you are, what is Innovation Endeavors, and we'll come down the line and jump right in.
Sure. So I'm Dror Berman. I'm a founding partner of Innovation Endeavors. I started the firm with Eric Schmidt back when he was the CEO of Google, really to focus on entrepreneurs solving some of the most important problems that humanity is going to face through technology. We've been very focused on some of the cutting-edge technologies, mostly around instrumentation, compute, and robotics, as they are being applied to some of the most important domains, things like life sciences, agriculture, space, materials, and so on and so forth.
That's great.
Matt Bernard, I'm one of the founders and CEO of Plenty. And at Plenty, what we've been working on over the last 5 years is to bring the farm inside, turn the farm into a platform, all towards the end of being able to grow anywhere where there is people, water, and power, and doing so with food that tastes better than people have ever had before, and with a level of purity that's unachievable out in the field in the greenhouse. So there's a very high efficiency farms, and that's what we're doing at Plenty.
That's great. Before we jump into the Super Revolution and your case study and experiences, I always like to start, because there are a lot of people who come here from out of town, the state of the valley. It's been quite a year for tech, big tech, both good and bad. I'm a Valley native, and it's always interesting to see the cycles over the 50 years that I've either lived here or been coming back. Dror, I'll start with you. What is your sense about the state of Silicon Valley today, and whether it's the amount of money that's available? Is there still a lot on the sidelines? Is there still excitement as we get into data and privacy? Is there more consternation and pause? But how do you feel about the state of the valley?
Sure. So I'm very excited. It's been I've been doing what I'm doing now for 10 years now, and I can say that it's been trending into much more interesting directions throughout this time. One of the most interesting trends that we see is that more and more entrepreneurs are actually starting to build mission-driven companies. Companies actually focus on solving some of the most important issues that, again, we are facing we're facing now, or we're going to face as humanity. There are many examples that we are seeing. Companies like Plenty, for example, or Farmers Ridge, thinking about new approaches to or new architectures to grow food that would be much more sustainable, much more affordable, and really sort of a completely level of quality that we've been used to so far. Companies like Planet Labs, for example, they've been really building a new way for us to observe what's going on around the world on a daily basis. And so we see this trend. We've been seeing this trend for a while, but I can say that maybe more so than now, more founders are thinking about how do we really work on a very important problem and not just sort of trying to optimize an Excel spreadsheet, right? And that's becoming more apparent now. The other things that we are seeing that are interesting, I can say that one of the things that we've been fascinated by is really the availability of capital that has come to the valley over the last few years. Really allows those entrepreneurs to be much more audacious than ever before. So we see an increasing number of companies, maybe Matt is going to talk about it later, not just thinking about building technology and selling it to the large corporates, but really thinking about how do we actually raise enough money to go and build what we call a full stack company, an end-to-end solution, and go and actually compete with incumbents and build a big company around it. And then the last trends that we've been seeing is given everything that I've said, is that the large corporates are really trying to move in earlier and interact or engage with startups. And so for us, we've been finding new ways to partner with large corporates such that they can actually partner with those entrepreneurs early on.
That's great. Matt, how do you feel the state of the valley, and especially as an entrepreneur?
Well, Dror took most of what's good to say relative to what's happening in the valley. But I'll say, at Plenty, I don't know that we're positioned to speak for the valley as a whole, but as we focus on our technologies and our platform, we see more and more of what we're doing around the Valley as well, which is the focus on the physical world, which Dror was hinting at, and what we can do to help move industries that have been hard to move with the technologies of Silicon Valley to a very different place. In our case, that means delivering more nutrients to more people in ways that are more accessible and approachable, in ways that are more energy efficient and resource efficient. So that focus on the physical world is a theme that we seem to see increasing. And one that we're certainly excited to be a part of.
That's great. And my bit of editorializing there, being a Valley native, is we spent 3 days here talking about a lot of the problems that are huge and very real, and I agree with that. But if you're here a lot, or if you get certain newsletters and read certain blogs, there's a lot of great things happening. There are a lot of entrepreneurs really trying to change things for the better in the Valley, and I think that needs to be noted as we sit in our state of luxurious despair at the Ritz-Carlton Half Moon Bay.
I think what you find in a lot of those companies is that as you build a mission-driven company, it actually makes things much easier. It's much easier to recruit. It's much easier to think big and sort of long-term. And I think a lot more entrepreneurs are starting to find that they're attracted to it. So if you've made enough money, if you sort of worked at some of the big social networks around here, and you want to do something next, you want to do something meaningful.
Right, I agree. Well, let's dig in. Dror, share with us the super evolution and communicate to our audience the theory and the thesis behind the super evolution. What is it, and what is its sort of long-term impact?
Sure. So Eric and I coined the term back in 2010. We were looking at really what's going on in the world and noticing that by 2050 we're going to have some serious problems here with regard to population increasing, climate change, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, we were looking at the pace of innovation that was really happening, taking place in a lot of those industries, and we sort of came to the conclusion that pace, the sort of linear pace of innovation, was not going to be enough to actually help us face those issues. And as we were looking at it, we were also noticing some of the technologies that were emerging and starting to converge, things like instrumentation or data being generated now at amounts that we've never seen before, the innovation in compute and innovation across engineering. And what we noticed was that a lot of those were coming together and converging to create what we saw as a period of radical change or radical acceleration of those industries. To give more context, if you think about innovation cycles in a lot of those industries like agriculture, like life sciences, space, and so on and so forth, we've done the same thing for basically since the dawn of humanity, right? There's always been a human in a process. Those have all been driven by humans, where a scientist generally would go through a design, build, test cycle, and he or she would do it based on a certain hypothesis, and they would run an experiment, see what happened, and then basically design the next experiment based on that. And obviously that was very, very limited in scope, and in sort of it was a very expensive process, which means that in a lot of the most important industries, such as agriculture, it really took sometimes decades and billions of dollars to reach a step function improvement. And what got us excited is that we understood that this is all changing now, because this is now starting to become driven by machines. We can have machines design almost infinite number of experiments to be run at the same time. Those could be done basically more effectively and more efficiently, but actually more creatively than humans, because we have no human bias, or machines have no human bias. We can then basically run those experiments, again, much faster and much more cost-effective way through some of the innovation we've seen in automation and robotics. And then we can use instrumentation to read all the data that is being generated through those experiments and feed it back into a central system, central software basically, that keeps looking at everything that worked and everything that didn't work, and can look at millions or billions of data points from previous experiments, and essentially use machine learning to infer what kind of experiments we want to run next. And really that has been allowing us increasingly to do things at a completely different scale and a fraction of the time and cost. Right? If you think about it, in some of those experiments, and I'm hoping that Matt can talk about it today, we can run 1,000x more experiments at a 1/1000th of the cost and time. Right? And that literally allows us to collapse time in some of those industries, which we call the super evolution. Right? And we are seeing that now being manifested in industries such as agriculture, in life sciences, in space, and in many, many other industries.
Yeah, I think the collapse of time is a really interesting sort of philosophy and what it means. Talk to us about, how did you, connect with innovation? Did you hear about the super evolution theory and say, hey, that's us, and should we connect? And how did you guys get together? And then what does the super evolution theory mean to you and your company?
Yeah, we first connected with Innovation Endeavors because I have a longstanding relationship both through business school and through an industry that we used to work in with one of the partners at Innovation Endeavors. And so I went to him. He has a great strategic mind. Went to him for counsel, and what started as counsel turned into an unintentional pitch. And so over a period of months or half a year or so, we ended up as partners.
That's great.
So that's how we hooked up. But then a part of it is because what we were focused on, and that's the super evolution theory for Innovation Endeavors, aligns so well. Because at Plenty, we are collapsing time in quite a few ways. And if you think about the first business or the first set of things we're applying our platform and our farms towards, it is fruits and vegetables or nutrient-rich foods. The hierarchy of the human diet is calories, then protein, and then nutrients. And so we believe that this last thing to solve is nutrients, and that's where the next revolution will be. But as you look at the human diet over time, it's changed quite a bit over the last couple hundred years. And as it relates to nutrient-rich food or fruits and vegetables, almost every single thing that you can find in the grocery store is very different today than it was even 50 years ago, much less 100 or 200 years ago. If you crack a watermelon open 200 years ago, it would look nothing like you would expect a watermelon to look. That white pith that you cut off, the whole thing was white pith. There are crops, strawberries were tiny, and you had to eat them as soon as you picked them because they squashed in your hand when you picked them. So, it's just, all these crops have been optimized for both an industrialized growing format out in the field, as well as thousands of miles and weeks, and sometimes even months in the supply chain. So what we're doing at Plenty is now collapsing what was already a very innovative field, given the constraints, right? So you have to learn year over year. And at Plenty, we now get to learn week over week and month over month, as opposed to year over year. And so because we're now getting 40 growing cycles in the space of a year, because
and 40 as opposed to what typically maybe?
Call it 1 to 3 for the types of crops we're talking about.
You moved to 40.
That's right. So, and it keeps rising. When we first started talking with Innovation Endeavors, we were at between 9 and 16, depending on what crop we're talking about, and now we're around 40 and rising.
And what specifically has driven that? Is it the ubiquitous computing and edge? Is it data innovation? Is it, what specifically has allowed you to go from 3 to 9 to 40?
Well, it's a whole soup of things. One is just getting better at what we do. One is all of that data that Dror was talking about that allow us to understand the photosynthetic rate much more deeply and how to influence it. I'll tell you a story from a couple years ago, where as we were pushing plants harder and harder, part of one of our farms started to die, and we didn't understand why. And we had an emergency room that we set up that we had rank prioritized a couple dozen hypotheses as to what was happening. We assigned people to each of them, and then we gathered several times a day, and we're rapidly running tests to figure it out. And what's interesting here is a story both about rapid learning, covering ground that's never been covered before, and also human bias, where our world-class plant science team was systematically ignoring what our own machine learning apps were telling us was true, because established plant science, where the control over the photosynthetic rate was never something that was in people's grasp, would suggest that the things the plants were asking for, they should not be asking for. In fact, they were asking for them because we weren't giving it to them. They were becoming weak and susceptible to disease. So we were pushing them to just a place they've never been before. And we continue to do that. And so without the machines, as Dror put it, without these machine learning apps that we had written, without the fields of data science where they are in 2019 or 2017, as the case was then, we wouldn't have been able to figure that one out.
I'd like to go to the audience. Ultimately, this is for you. So we have some mics. Any questions out here? Have some questions in the back. If you could introduce yourself as well, thank you.
My name is Kitty. I work for the Aspen Institute. What kind of crops and are you really successful at? And are they engineered in a way that you will have detractors saying, forget it. These are pioneered plants. They're not natural to the system, et cetera, and so forth. What are your biggest obstacles to the public? And can we find any of your crops in the grocery store today?
You can. So a couple things there. I think there were a couple questions there. One is, what crops do we grow? That answer changes quarter over quarter and year over year. So we have grown over 1,000 edible cultivars in our farms and test farms over the last 18 or so months. So we've grown a lot. And then the question becomes, what can we grow economically and sell at grocery store prices? And that answer, as I said, is changing and growing quarter over quarter and year over year. So the first crops we have commercialized are leafy green crops. There are a couple things that are true about those. Almost all of the plant is edible. And there are a couple other things that are true that make them more economic. And the next crop and crop type that we will be commercializing here in a matter of months is strawberries. So berries are our next crop. And following that, we have other types of fruits like tomatoes, as well as some vegetables and root crops. So as the farms become more efficient, and here I'll tell a quick anecdote to illuminate that. Because of the effectiveness of the learning that we're able to apply to the plants, the farm is now a platform. We version the platform year over year. The version that we released this year drove about 80% of the energy out of the farm relative upon a per kilogram basis. It drove about 85% of the work hours out of the farm. And we see this year over year, this march of more productivity, more efficiency. And what that does is it pushes more and more crops into that economic realm. And so you can find us today at places like Safeway, where actually today is the day that we just showed up at Safeway, and Good Eggs and a few other places. So that every month that's changing too.
That's great. Any questions here? I have a slightly off-script question. And we had a great conversation the other day on quantum computing. Dror, I'll start with you. We talk about the collapse of time and the super evolution. Where does quantum computing sort of fit into that? And does that run parallel? Is it in complement to a super evolution theory? Do you have your own personal thoughts on sort of quantum computing and where that could help companies like Plenty or companies in your portfolio? There's still a lot of confusion around quantum computing.
Yeah, if you think about the core of the super evolution, right, there are almost three different aspects, right? You have the compute that allows you to design experiments at a different scale. Then you have the engineering aspect, right? And there's a variety of things that are happening from an engineering perspective that allow us to execute sort of really right into the physical world, the biological world, what we think is possible. And then there is instrumentation or data aspect, right? That is more about the reading what's going on in the world. Compute is essentially a very important part of it. And in a lot of those industries, for example, in material science, for example, there's still a bunch of problems that we can't really solve through the compute power we have today. So we see quantum computing as a sort of as a next generation capability or a platform that would exist. We've been observing and investing in the space. We're excited about what's coming next. We think that in the next probably 5 years, we'll bring not only a new capabilities from a technology perspective, but actually more of the industry into it as well, because the industry is not ready to absorb this kind of capability yet. You have to write algorithms differently. You have to really build the interface to really allow the market to interface with this new technology. So we think our timeline is about 5 years. We've been very excited. There are different approaches to it, and Google just announced a significant breakthrough. And so we think whether it's Google or we actually have a portfolio company called Atom Computing that is taking a completely new approach called neutral atoms. We think that one of those companies are already in the race. Will probably develop. We'll see more breakthroughs over the next couple of years.
That's great. I'm about out of time here, so my parting question is always like to give some actionable sort of advice or valuable information to the audience. What do you guys read to stay on top of things, whether it's specifically about these issues that are related to the super evolution, just what's happening in the Valley, different companies that are getting funded, something maybe obscure if there's an interesting blog that you read, or who do you read? What do you read? Any advice for the audience on some?
We try to spend as much time as possible with entrepreneurs. We believe that entrepreneurs are really living in the edge, and innovating at a pace, again, that it would be very hard for us to wait until we can read about it. So our motto is, by the time you can actually read about it, it's probably too late. So we try to engage as early as possible, work entrepreneur at the edge of the network. And I would say we found very creative ways to work with partners on the corporate side to help them get up to speed much more quickly. So we have actually designed and launched several initiatives in areas like life sciences, like agriculture, supply chain logistics, and so on, where we create more as a convening entity that brings together all the largest companies around the world and allow them to engage with startups in a more meaningful way for them, but also for the startups.
What do you read, or how do you stay on top of things in terms of technology innovation and things like that?
Yeah, we find my answer is somewhat similar to Jor's in that we find it both through the recruiting process. We also find it now. We're in the fortunate position of being a target of other young teams that have recently formed or have developed technologies that might be relevant to us. And so it's really staying active in the community that keeps us abreast of what's happening. We found that to be the most productive.
That's great. Well, this was a great conversation. I wish we had another 15 minutes. A round of applause for our panelists here, please.